Welcome to Flashback to a Fabulous Future with Cheryl Johnson. Over the next hour, you'll learn how the past influences the future and how you can create a fabulous future for yourself. Now, here's Cheryl.
Welcome to Flashback to a Fabulous Future. We are on a journey to understand the past so that we can move forward into the future with focus and energy. We are very honored today to have our guest, Jonathan Holtz. He is one of the founders of the Legion Mastermind, and I'll let him get into that a little bit later. And he can tell you a little bit more about himself and his history, what he's done. And today we're going to talk about conscious leadership. There are lots of leadership models out there in the world. And we're going to talk today why we believe that this topic or this particular model of leadership is so important, especially with all of the new technologies moving onto the market these days. So welcome, Jonathan. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right. What's up, Cheryl? I'm really glad to be here talking about one of my favorite subjects, because I believe it's so important at this, new wave that we're seeing happen on the planet, through technology and everything like that. So a little bit about myself. I'm just you could call me a little bit of a serial entrepreneur, a builder, visionary. Sometimes I like to call myself a digital frontiersman. So in essence, I love the internet. I love tech. I love all that, but simultaneously, which that's more of a analytical type of way of seeing things, is consciousness. So if we go back in history and we take a look at the greatest minds, the people that really changed society to a very high degree, if we go back to Hermes Trismegistus, if we look at Galileo, Leonardo da Vinci, Benjamin Franklin, and the list goes on, Alexander the Great, the great philosophers, I like to call it SPA. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. And Aristotle, who did Aristotle teach? Alexander the Great. And all these individuals understood a modality of the inner development of self. Like it was one of the most important things ever. And in essence, that's kind of what, consciousness is. So as the way that you're able to become more conscious and you're more aware of self and yourself, it literally has a ripple effect out into society. This is where I was telling you a little bit about how we can look at David Hawkins' work. Dr. David Hawkins passed away in 2012, but he left us some great gifts. And one of the greatest gifts that he left us was a measurement tool of what consciousness is. Whether these numbers are correct or not, there's debate about this. Supposedly they're scientifically proven and such. But with that being said, he mapped out what all the great ancients actually have been speaking about for thousands of years, for millennia, throughout the ages, different cultures, different modalities. So what is this exactly? And that right there is the elevation of consciousness. Some people say that, hey, that person has bad vibes, has negative vibes, has lower vibes, they have high vibes. So there's so many different ways that they've iterated this type of information out into the world, and we've taken them on. What I believe is that, we're at a very important time in humanity's timeline, and we are accelerating very fast into the future, and we are creating things that can be quite dangerous. And the thing is, if we don't have what I like to call conscious leaders on the planet, they're going to make some bad decisions. And those bad decisions can actually have a very detrimental effect. So one of my missions here on the planet is to bring more conscious leaders into the world, teach more conscious leaders, teach leaders to be more conscious and understand these modalities and what you can do. And maps of consciousness, if you could see the screen here, if anyone has ever heard about it, or if you haven't, all you got to look up is Maps of Consciousness by Dr. David Hawkins. There's a lot of different versions, but it gives you a notion of what it is that we're talking about. But here's the thing. So many different teachers talk about this. It's just always a different angle to it. And this just happens to be one that I like because you can measure it. And again, whether it's right or wrong and some things are exactly in order that they're supposed to be, it doesn't matter. It's the notion of what it is to become, more of an enlightened individual, more present individual, a person that is more in love. So hopefully that gives a little bit of a notion of, what that is, but there's so much more to go into with the maps of consciousness itself,
Exactly. And so that leads me to my next question. What is the difference between this type of leadership and other types of leadership? Why would we, aspire to be a conscious leader as opposed to a driven, motivated, I'm going to get everything done kind of leader?
Well, here's the thing. We've had a lot of different type of leadership because of where we've been in the cycle of time. And we needed that very, let's just call it hardcore, tyrannical, get shit done type of way. And that was necessary at the time, right? And sometimes you need to be a little bit, if you want to call it tyrannical, in order to get things done, or you have to be a little bit more, let's just say, creating some deep impact in ways that might not be seen as good for society as other modalities, and being the nice guy, right? Sometimes they call it the leader doesn't always have to be the nice guy. But the thing is, a lot of it has come from the mind, right? And the mind is great, and it facilitates so much, and it facilitates strategy, and it's great being the intellectual and knowing so much. But if we go back in history and we take a look at some of the different societies, some of the different countries, some of the different religions, we're going to see a cycle. And that cycle literally repeats itself. And, I don't know if you've heard the great saying, it's like, strong men create good times create weak men create bad times, and bad times create strong men once again. So if we go back in history, we're going to take a look at some of these societies that did so well. Okay, the Greeks, the Romans, the Persians, the Egyptians, and we're going to see something very similar. Is that once they start reaching these very elite levels, where there's much more wealth, there's more power, more intellectual prowess, a lot of times they get taken over by barbarians and by people that you would not consider so intellectual. But what are these barbarians and these hoodlums and whatever it might be that you want to call them?
Genghis Khan.
Right, these are all names, right? You know this very well. These are all names. They had heart, right? So they were getting themselves out of the head and more heart. And they were tapping into something special. If we go into the maps of consciousness, once you get up to 500, you get into love, and I'm not going to say that these barbarians were at the level 500 or whatever it was, but they were tapping into something very special. And what ends up happening is that, as we try to become too intellectual and too strategic and trying to take advantage of people and everything like that, it brings me back to one of David Hawkins' books, which is Power versus Force. And Power versus Force depicts the difference between having power and doing something by force. And, an easy way to put it, and the way I like to put it, is that with force, you need outside energy. So with force, there's a winner and there's a loser, right? Forcing the door, forcing against the door. So I'm pushing really hard and the other side is trying to push in. Okay, if I'm just with power, I just basically throw the door down, or I knock the door down with just pure power. Power comes from within. Okay, so if we look at it in the level of the human, power itself is something intrinsic that comes from inspiration and doing something very special, divinely, and it's internal. When you have force, it needs outside energy, it needs outside reinforcement, and there's always a winner or a loser. So why in the world would we want to utilize force? And that's the thing. A lot of the leadership in today's day and age utilizes force instead of power, and the one thing that I'm like, okay, when is this going to come back? And maybe it's the conscious leader is they like to call it the philosopher king. And that was like Hermes Trismegistus, or King Solomon, they say also, had all the wisdom, right? King Solomon, was like he had a wish to be able to have whatever he wanted. He'd have all the riches in the world and the biggest kingdoms in the world. What do you pick? Wisdom. Okay. And wisdom itself allows someone to start tapping into those type of levels. So that philosopher king was there for the people, was compassionate, was loving. Yes, you're going to see ferociousness and everything like that. In order to be a king, you have to have that ferociousness. Like, what does that level of king actually look like? What happens in society today is like the king and the wizard. These are archetypes, right? The wizard and the king do not have, are not, I would say, just, you don't have a lot of these wizards and actual kings. We have a lot of princes. So you have a prince that basically, he hasn't become king yet. He has that power, but he has all these like lower echelon archetypes that he's still playing out. And if you look at these different type of charts, for example, the maps of consciousness, you go through different ones. So those that are listening, I'll just give you guys a quick iteration, under 200. And this is what caught my attention too. So how David Hawkins puts it, and this was at the time, and this was, I don't know, the early 2000s. I'm not even sure the exact date. But basically he was talking about how 78% of the population was under a 200. Okay. Under a 200 is pride, anger, desire, fear, grief, apathy, guilt, and shame. Shame being the lowest echelon, like at a 20. Instead of all the way up to, you could go all the way to 1,000. 700 basically gets you to enlightenment. But all these levels are, as they would call, like lower chakra level or lower vibratory states. Once someone reaches a 200, you get into courage, and that is a more upper echelon state of being. And you have the courage to, let's say, speak up for yourself. You have the courage to stand up for the bum on the streets that's getting, beat up by some random guys for no reason. You have the courage to ask for a raise. Right underneath that, you have pride. And, pride is like kind of like, okay, you're starting to gain a little bit of momentum, and you're starting to see something better, but it's in a way that it's like probably not the most convenient to those around you, because it could be diminishing. So these different modalities is where the majority of the population lives, and a lot of our leaders are in right now. So they're literally power plays, wanting to do things for themselves, like greed and gluttony and the pride sector, the desire, utilizing fear, not only fear within themselves, but they're using fear tactics out in the world. And what happens if we have people in the maps of consciousness that are coming from a place of courage? Now, as you go up, you go to at 200, you're at courage, 250, you're at neutrality, 310, you're at willingness, 350, you're at acceptance. Okay. 400, they call it inner light. 440 is inner wisdom. 500 is inner love. And by the way, I think this is the same one as the David Hawkins one. And at love, that's a very hard state to get into, because imagine for a quick second that you will literally be able to just see everything and everyone from a state of love. So imagine if our leaders actually embody that. It's a powerful state. For example, Gandhi was at a level 700, which, let's see where it goes here. So we go to oneness, it's more of a self-realization state. That's at 540. Presence, non-duality, right? So it's like dual in nature. That's some big thing. Even Dr. DeMartini talks about this a lot in some of his teachings. Some of the great teachings is that if you have the pyramid at the top and then you have the two dual sides down there, that's duality, and that's the animalistic side, right? So it's like fight or flight. Need to have something, afraid of something, black and white. And as you go up pyramid, you have one. That's why you see it in the dollar bill. This is why you see it in all these like sacred teachings. They talk about this, right? And so at the very top, some people call it source, some people call it the angelic state, where there is non-duality and there is nothing wrong. There's like, at the bottom you have support, you have challenge. Okay. At the top, you don't see anything as support or challenge. You just see things as they are. And that is a very powerful state to be in. And the great masters of society have looked, and they've trained, and they've read as many books as possible, learn from as many senseis as possible, from their great gurus and everything like that, in order to get to that state, which a lot of people like to call enlightenment. And that's where you start to get to that high level, which is 700. They call it awareness. Some people call it the enlightenment stage. And that's where a lot of people try to reach to, but not many people on the planet are there. Supposedly right now, there's less than a handful of potential people that are at an enlightened state. Some of them we may not even know that exist, like that could be just among us. But those that we think that we know exist and stuff like that, there's less than a handful on the planet. And these individuals have a ripple effect out into society. It's like you could just tell, like, Cheryl, you ever heard of I forgot when it was, like when Bill Clinton and, whether people like Bill Clinton or not, regardless of what he did, when he walked into a room, it's like people didn't even know that he was walking in the room, and it was like an explosion. Like the presence was just there. You ever have someone come into your space like that, Cheryl?
Yeah. And it's interesting because as you talk about that, and I know that, David Hawkins talks about kinesthesiology in his book, and, he gives the example of, and we've all probably seen this, where you put your arm out and somebody exerts pressure, and, depending on pressure against that, pushing against that, can help you determine, different, whether it's how genuine, I don't know. There's a lot of things there's so
yeah, exactly.
But it was interesting because yesterday I went, and I've had major problems with my sciatic nerve, and I went to get some acupuncture, and the guy before he was going to give me acupuncture, he's like, no, I got to do all these other things. I was like, okay, whatever. And it's not the same as, putting your arm out there, but some people have probably seen it. You put your thumb and I think your fourth finger, whatever it is, together. And then it was interesting because he talked about different foods and stuff, but as he used the word love, he would try to break my fingers apart. And it was really hard to do when I just said the word love.
Wow.
But when I said the word beautiful, he could easily break my fingers apart. And I was like, seriously, I'm not sure I'm buying into this. So I'm really trying hard to,
Yeah. You're like, oh boy. I want to see that.
But there is something about we talk about people and their presence, whether we like the person or not is not relevant, but their presence. And he also, I noticed, David Hawkins talks about, people, your ability to be able to tell whether people are being honest, and that kind of thing. And I was like, oh, this is really interesting. So yeah, I found that very interesting, because it's like, how can you tell whether people are at various levels? How do you measure this?
Yeah. So, David Hawkins has his own way of measuring, again, there's been some debate over like the way that you measure it. And that's why I personally say, like, I'm not so worried about the numbers and where they fit in the model, but they seem to be semi-accurate, at least, for myself and what I tap into intuitively, and from a lot of the different teachings that have existed for thousands of years. So, for me, it's like, this is a notion that people have felt into, that they have studied throughout the millennia now. Again, who knows how far back behind this, right? So like we go back even just to Hermes Trismegistus, and that's like very, very old, and the great philosophers, a couple, two millennia, 3 millennia, 4 millennia behind us. And the Egyptians, the great Egyptians also, how long have they really been here? And how long did that actually, now that they're looking at, the imprints, and, there was a guy that wrote a book, a really good documentary. It was called Magical Egypt. And I'm trying to think of his name, but he basically did Magical Egypt, and he was just talking about, very much about the mystery schools, which is a very similar thing. And they had some of these modalities where they knew that an individual was here for I like to call it, this is what I like to call it, inner evolution, which is helping yourself become more conscious and more present. And one of my favorite depictions from the Egyptian mystery schools and the Egyptians was in order to get into the afterworld, at the end of your life, you had to have that your heart weighed as much or less than a feather. Whoa. So what is that? Yeah. And it's one of my favorite depictions of what they created. And it's like, what does that mean, right? So what does it mean to have your heart weigh less than a feather? And that's a great question to ask, because, a heavy heart, you've heard that saying before, a heavy heart cannot love, right? A heavy heart cannot show gratitude. A heavy heart sometimes is heavy-hearted on others. And for that reason in itself, you see that, as you go up these levels, you start to see like just an evolutionary spirit of getting to a place of love, and like it starts right there. Like it starts with the courage. Then it's like being neutral. What is neutral being? It's like, okay, I'm willing to listen to both sides and I can actually be neutral about it. Right? How can I actually listen to something, whether I'm listening to Donald Trump, listen to Biden, I'm listening to Hitler or Malcolm X? How can I literally, and that sounds crazy sometimes because people are like, oh, how dare you talk about Hitler like that? And how dare you, Malcolm X or, Martin Luther King or something like that. It's like, there's always going to be the other side. There's people that loved Hitler. Okay. There's actually a huge documentary. It was called The Greatest Story Never Told. There's a lot of people that really believed in all the stuff that he was doing. As crazy as it sounds, there's the other side. It always exists. So it's like, how do you even get to that point? Okay. So on top of it is willingness. Okay. So if you're willing to listen, you're willing to see and not just be distracted by your own emotions. Okay. If you're in anger, if you're in fear, if you're in desire, you don't want to listen to the other side. But a proper businessman or woman, if they go into a business deal, they have to look in a very neutral fashion at the facts and the different sides. If they come in with a very emotional appeal of how they're doing, they might miss something. Okay, so that translates into everything. In relationships, exact same thing. Someone does something what you perceive as really bad, you start off by asking questions instead of automatically assuming that they did the worst case scenario. It's like, wait a second, okay, let me find out what's going on here before I jump to crazy conclusions. Because we know many people that just jump to conclusions and then they realize like, oh, okay, oops, maybe I was wrong about this. Or they find out like, oh, that wasn't the case at all. And here I am getting hella angry.
Yeah.
Right?
It's interesting. Yeah, because like Aristotle said, we need to focus on empathy, which I think is what you're talking about, because the core of understanding each other and the core of what it means to be human. So to me, empathy is, and huge. I don't, yeah, it's everything. And, this term is thrown around a lot in our world today about empaths, I think I'm somewhat of an empath. I tend to walk into a room and take on a lot of the mood and the,
energies.
The energy in the room. And that can be a good or a bad thing. And I can generally sense when people are being dishonest or genuine or, the other way. But even though I have that natural ability to do that, it hasn't always worked for me. I've had to learn how to make it work for me, exactly like you said, because Hitler is somebody that fascinates me. I don't agree with what he did. I don't approve of what he did. But what made you do what you did? Why? I just want to understand.
And how did he have so much impact? Like what did he do that had so much impact and have people, love him? And was he always like that? That's a big question too. Was he always like that? Was that his mission? Was he literally going down that road the whole entire time? Did something switch? Like we don't know, but if you come in from a neutral place, you can explore. And the problem is a lot of people, they don't have that neutrality to find out what potentially really happened. And as I said, like you start going up these different levels, let's say you get to acceptance, that this is where a lot of people like start losing their shit. But the greatest minds of history, the people that have changed history, they can tap into these levels. Okay. And they tap into these type of things. For example, acceptance. How can we accept, something like as crazy as what happened to Hitler? Because, DeMartini talks about this a lot. And this is a great thing that Aristotle also spoke on, was basically if everything, and this is just like physics and energy, anything with a negative energy always has the positive side on the other end. And energy neither can be destroyed or just displaced. It always just transfers over to something else. So if we believe that everything is in perfection in the grand universal scheme of things, let's just say, how in the world could, let's say, the Holocaust, or let's say the Oklahoma City bombing, or let's say 9/11, how in the world could we ever say that this was something that basically brought the positive side. How is that even possible? Okay, I'll give a great example myself. And there always is. This is the crazy part. There always is a positive side to it. So New York City, okay, when all that happened, we had never seen our country come together in such a fashion like we did when that happened. New York City never came together in a fashion like that happened. Okay. A lot of new things actually transpired out into the world, out into, let's just say, the United States, and brought people together probably in a very, very long time. And if you go down into it, I'm sure we could start using artificial intelligence. I guarantee in time, with these concepts that we talk about, they're more ethereal and there's just a lot of these ancients talked about it and everything like that. I guarantee AI is going to start proving this stuff, where you'll be able to see the trickle effect of the positivity that was caused by some of these events. So it's like, if you start to look at it and you look at the great masters that spoke about these things in the ancient mystery schools and everything like that, you start to see a complete different picture. And if you look at basically the maps of consciousness, it's like you start to realize that, oh, wait a second, we do have all that. And then duality is not really duality. Oh, bad and good, bad and good. It's like, what if there's bad and good? Then what is bad? Then what is bad and good?
Yeah,
doesn't really even exist.
Yeah,
you know?
It's a construct of our world, because in the world we live in, even time is a construct, and we're so married to the idea of, we talk about all these parallel universes and quantum physics and all this stuff, and as we talk about it, it's like, oh yeah, I believe that, I believe it's out there. But when we start having real conversations, everything always comes back to the here and now, what's happening in front of me. How do I deal with, exactly this? And so I want to step back just a second and ask you a very controversial question. You seem to like controversy, so that's okay.
I'm all about that.
Oh, yeah, exactly. So let's go to Donald Trump once again. Love him or hate him, I don't care. That's not important. He's known as the great negotiator. Well, and that's his claim to fame.
Master negotiator, right? Master negotiator.
Yeah. And people would get so upset when he would say, "Oh, we got these love letters from Kim Jong-un. I can't say his name. Sorry, from North Korea."
Yeah.
Sorry, not good with that. But and people would be like, "Oh, you can't talk nice about him. You can't be having love letters with him or whatever." What are your thoughts on something like that and his particular claim to fame, I guess?
I mean, that's actually, he's a great one to call out, because he causes mass polarization.
Yes.
A lot of times when people are just themselves and they're so sovereign, they will polarize people. That's just the reality. Like, if you're so sovereign, you're on mission, and you just are exactly who the fuck you are to such a high degree, you are going to either turn people off, or people are gonna be in love with you. And it doesn't have to be obviously to the extent of like how Donald Trump is and everything like that. But what you do is you get into that mode. So for me, Donald Trump is just a very sovereign individual that just acts exactly how he is. And what he was doing with, Kim Jong-un and whatever the love letters were and everything like that, to me, it's like he's set forward to basically get closer to potential peace negotiations. Now, why do a lot of people hate Trump? Because he said the thing like, grab him by the pussy, excuse my language and stuff like that. It was all over the internet. So he said those words, and then, he was tweeting, and just people were pissed off. And the thing is, he was also a very strong masculine man. A lot of people are going to call him toxic masculine, everything like that. And a lot of people, okay, and if we go back in history, and I'm not going to go too deep into the subject, but a lot of men that were highly traumatized and didn't have strong masculine men in their household, guess who are the ones that don't like Trump? A lot of those men, at least men, okay, and then women also that didn't have that strong masculine father, husband, and stuff like that. So if we actually go and do the research, and I'm telling you right now, I myself 100%, as I get further down the line, I'm going to be using some artificial intelligence to prove these concepts. Okay, because like now it's like people are basing stuff off emotion and stuff. Okay. When we go and chat with ChatGPT, other than some of the rules that they put in there, it's a non-biased. It's non-biased. It doesn't care. It's like, hey, this is what it is, other than the rules that they are putting in, which is one of the reasons why I believe conscious leadership is so freaking important, because, a conscious leader is going to make sure that there's an unbiased approach to looking at information and giving us what's needed, instead of being like, oh, this is wrong, oh, you can't put this out into the world. So Trump himself was an individual, extremely sovereign. A lot of people don't like him because he was exactly what it is, showing him a strong masculine man. And here's the thing, like him or not, the guy got a lot of things done. Now, people may say that, like Biden is doing his thing and, whatever it might be. But it is very important to understand that the sovereignty factor is one of the biggest things of raising consciousness, because the more that you could be yourself, we all are a unique thumbprint in the grand scheme of everything that is happening. And we are masters in specific fields. And the more that we could tap into that genius that we are, the more we have impact on the planet. And the more we start to realize that we're not here for our ego. We're not here to just go chase material things, go chase having sex, go chase the ego lifting and pride things that we want and everything like that. We're actually here for something much bigger. And the more enlightened we can become, without saying that enlightenment is somewhere to reach, it's like, just keep on going. In my opinion, you just keep on going, because there's a vast universe all around us to say like, oh, I'm enlightened. And it's like, I'm still here on the planet, but it's like, what else is out there, right? But to me, it's like, it's allowing ourselves to just get to a point to help humanity, and those ripple effects go out. But it always starts with self. So it's like, the more that you understand some of these things, and guess what? No matter what, people want to get pissed off at Trump and whoever he is, freaking, even to a certain extent, Hitler, you know what I mean? Like, these were highly evolved individuals. But for example, Hitler was definitely hitting some major stuff. And he obviously, there's things that's still within him with 150, anger and pride, that was still there. So he may have hit higher levels of consciousness, which were like what got people to gravitate toward him and everything like that. And he's dropping back into fear. And also, whether it was the drugs that he was doing or whatever it was, anger and pride, self-explosion, boom, basically gone. So
let me ask you another, because you brought up another controversial topic, and I love controversial topics.
These are my favorite. I'll go with these all day long.
Well, you bring up toxic masculinity. And I look at you as a masculine person, but I don't look at you as toxic, And so when we look at this consciousness chart, where do you see toxic masculinity as opposed to a strong masculine person who is going to make a positive impact and be a good influence on the world?
That's an amazing question, by the way. Amazing question, because the problem is that in today's society, toxic masculinity and true masculinity have been literally skewed, and they're trying to intertwine them. And if you go back in history, one of the most important things in order to take over a country, in order to take on a city, in order to take on the enemy, one of the most important parts is that you have to take out the leadership. Okay? And in taking out the leadership, who are the leaders? These are probably the most masculine, strong men of society. Okay, so it is literally vital to take them out. That is part of war strategy. Okay, war strategy, you have to take out basically the general, you want to take out the people that are in charge. And these are usually the ones that, not just from the intellectual strategic point of being it, they're the strong masculine ones. So the problem is in today's society, they're trying to intertwine toxic masculinity, like a strong man that is very clear in his direction, is going to put, a man in his place and a woman in his place. And it's like, this actually is one of the most important things. And actually, one of the best things that I heard that makes perfect sense is let's go to war. Okay, let's go to war, and let's have war on the streets, blood on the streets, and you will literally see how quickly, how fast we go into what some people like to call as right order, masculine, feminine. Soon as that happens, you will see how the women are going to go to support the men. Okay, nurses, things like that. And they're going to be in the houses, like protecting the children and stuff. And who are going to be out in the streets in the war and like going to find food and supplies and out in the war territory? It's going to be the men.
Yes.
Okay. So very quickly, when we go into a situation like that, you're going to see how fast we go into that type of thing. And you're not going to call the man toxic masculine at that point in time. You're going to look at him like, holy shit, this is my protection. If not, me and my children, a woman, coming from a woman's perspective, we could die.
Yeah.
We need protection. And it's like, hey, I'm going to try to feed the children. I'm going to make the clothes for the man. And there's a support system and it works in unison. So it's a natural order. And they're trying to take us out of that natural order. And a lot of people that, like a lot of the things there are some mental instabilities because of the world that we're living in today, whether it's done by design, which 100% could be happening right now through technology and, different politics that are coming into place, or whether it's just done by basically us going too far in tech and, scrolling on our phones and stuff on social media, and reading, digesting news and stuff like that. It doesn't really matter. It's just, it's not the right order of what happens when the natural order takes place. And that's one of the greatest ways to see it is through that, right? So toxic masculinity is something that they're kind of doing it. So, going a little bit back to your question, can a man be toxic? Of course they can. And this is a great depiction where you see a man that is in those lower vibratory states. Okay, so if he's in fear and he's in pride and he's in anger and he's grief and he's in shame, he is not going to be the greatest person to be around. But as you go up, and I like to call it going into kingdomship, and a man is assertive. He's on point. He's not going to take shit from someone. They're trying to skew that, which is a powerful state to be in. Okay, that brings right order into a society. They try to skew that with the other ones, and that is where there has to be a distinguishing between those two different sides, which society is trying to push as these guys that are being strong and doing the right things as toxic masculinity. When in reality, that's exactly what is probably the most flourishing, brings the greatest families, brings the greatest dynamics, brings right order into a family that keeps a family together. And that's a little bit of like what society has been doing as of late.
I agree. Thank you. I'm a child of the 70s, I guess. And that's when all of these women's movements, came into play. And even from that moment, at that early age and all this was new onto the scene and everything. I was like, this just doesn't feel right. My father was a great man and he was a great provider, but yet he was still very compassionate. And he, my brothers played sports and everything. And my favorite thing to do was tag along with my dad and go to all my brothers' games because I got to spend time with my dad and we got our one-on-one time. And we'd have these meaningful conversations, and probably one of the most influential people in my life was my dad.
Wow.
And I didn't see him as toxic masculinity. He was our provider, and he took care of us and he made sure, that we were safe. But I didn't see it that way. So I've always struggled through all the years from the 70s on to go, I'm missing something here. What's going
on here? This doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Well, and unfortunately, I did get into a situation when I got married, and it was an abusive situation. And then I was like, oh, okay, this is what toxic masculinity is. This is not what a good husband and provider and person does, And thank goodness we got out of that situation. And now I'm with a man who is like my dad. He's I really appreciate that.
And now there's contrast, and let's bring up a little bit more of a controversial subject, So what is, as I was bringing up before, that there's always a trickle down effect. What is the positive that actually came out from this man being in that manner? It's like, is that obviously if this is something, if you only want to even go into, because I know that could be a touchy subject and such, but there has to be some type of benefit, whether you do know it or you don't. There's benefit that comes from that. Just like myself, one of the big things that happened to me when I was younger, when I was 22 years old, I went to prison for selling marijuana. Okay. And like, I could look at it and be like, holy smokes, this is the worst thing ever happened to me. I could literally had it take me down in every single way. And I use it as a positive. Now I look back and I'm freaking grateful as hell that happened. I would never even change it. So it's like, I found ways to find, holy smokes, the positive side out of it. And it's created I'm very proud of myself and who I am and everything that I've done and what I've been able to accomplish through the struggles. And there's positivity. So can you see any positive that you saw trickle down later down the road, or maybe even simultaneously that something was happening?
Definitely. I always kind of joke, when we're young, I looked to my first husband as somebody who I perceived as masculine, as somebody, but in my naivety, can't say that word either. I was like, oh, I was starstruck. I was like, oh, this is what love is all about. Right. And then we got married, and I was like, when all hell broke loose and life didn't go according to plan, I was like, no, I'm going to do something different this time. I'm consciously going to make an effort to look for these types of characteristics in somebody else. I wasn't jaded, like I'm never getting married again. I don't want anything to do with that. I was like, no, I made a choice, and it was not a good choice. And it was made out of pure innocence, for lack of a better word. And now I'm a little more mature. Certainly, I wish I don't know. And just on a side note.
Yeah, and it's contrast too, right? Like, you probably imagine that if you didn't have that type of relationship, how much you could appreciate a good man, right? Like, and see them in a whole different manner, where there's probably a much higher appreciation, which I guarantee brings in a more loving relationship coming up. That's just one of many different angles that I could possibly see it.
Well, and you said it better than I can. And to me, one of his most endearing attributes is I had 4 kids. When we got married, he had no kids. For various reasons, was unable to have children getting into the relationship. But he took on 4 children.
Wow.
And he fathered them as if they were his own.
Wow.
And that, to me, is an example of masculinity.
Wow. Yeah. Big time. 100%. Yeah. Quite an endeavor to take on, right?
Yes. And to forfeit having his own, biological children. So that was a big deal. And that's what I think you're right. They're out of unfortunate situations. We can always see the good. And it's almost like he was a placeholder, you know what I mean? Like having a placeholder until you're able to come into something so freaking amazing. Because if he wasn't the placeholder, there was something else. Maybe it wouldn't have been as a miraculous and amazing relationship that you have now, and it would just been another relationship. And you said it exactly. You're touching on all these very interesting things, because I've often said, if I would have married my second husband when I was 20, I wouldn't have appreciated him and who he was.
Right. Yeah. Imagine. Yeah. Contrast is like crazy. Contrast is so important. I've been talking a lot about contrast as of late. And it's like, without contrast, like if you never were in the dark, when you see light, you wouldn't see light and appreciate it to a high degree. If you just saw light all your life, it's like, what's the big deal? But if you're in the dark and you see light, it's like, oh, this is beautiful, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So, as we're getting kind of to a close here, I do want to talk about the Legion Mastermind that you and some others have founded, and exactly this conscious leadership plays into that, and what Legion is doing and all the great things they're doing to promote this kind of leadership in the world. Yeah,
I mean, the reason, that Legion was forged out of, something that I've just had within me for a very long time, and the funny part about it is, like, I didn't really know what it was, and it just came to me, like over a decade ago, I don't know now, maybe even 13, 14 years ago, maybe even longer than that, where I said that, like, for some reason, I knew that my mission on this planet was to bridge the gap between technology and mankind's wisdom. Okay. And wisdom has a lot to do with conscious leadership. So for me, it's like a lot of my companies, just had that in mind. And now you're seeing it come to fruition even more. So it was definitely like a message from the gods, if you want to call it. And, when we started Legion, it was more of like, we were just going to have a watch line and everything like that. And slowly but surely, the vision that I was putting in this other company, it was called the Digital Man. And the cool thing about Digital Man was like, it was a great business model and everything, but it was also digital man. I tried to make it seem like mankind, but women were like, I don't know how I take on to that. So like we kind of like transmuted that into like Legion, where the big part about it, and the way I like to explain what Legion is, if anyone is wondering, is like that we're gathering 333 visionaries and change makers that want to create impact on the planet through technology. And the values that we have is about, being conscious, being aware, doing something great for humanity. And one of the most important things I believe in, there's conscious leadership. So there's a lot of leaders in our group and everything like that. And we want to bring people that want to create a better humanity, that are not here for the pride, the anger, the desire, the fear and grief. And here's the thing, there's nothing wrong with that, because we're all at that level. That's what people don't understand. Like and that's where you start to see compassion, like you were talking about, and you see willingness, neutrality, acceptance. As you get the higher echelons, you don't see those things. So like just by judging someone that is in fear, their desires and pride, that within itself is a lower vibration by itself. So it's like, if you start to become more compassionate, then you learn, wow, this person had a really rough life. They weren't raised in the right situations. They were getting beat up as children. They were sexually abused. They were this. And it's like, these people, what they need is not to be, smacked down upon and frowned upon and, judged upon. It's more like these people need to learn that there's a better way. And if we can teach these people and show them the way of how you could become more conscious, get up to courage, get up to willingness. What if that was actually something that could happen? Holy smokes, a different world that we will live in. Imagine a lot of these people can actually learn these different modalities. And the thing is, there's so many people doing this out in the world. There's like Harry Palmer from Avatar, Dr. DeMartini from the DeMartini Institute, Landmark Education, Gratitude, Tony Robbins stuff, like it's all over the place. But to me, it all comes down to one thing, and it's inner evolution. And that inner evolution is the very important pinnacle to help us get to better places. So we placed upon, what we created there, upon the notion that we want to do something greater for humanity in this new day and age where technology is moving far too fast, especially now with artificial intelligence. We started this before ChatGPT came out. We were already talking about the mass acceleration of technology and how things were going to move exponential. Because I've been paying attention. I've been talking about revolution for over a decade now. Like I've known that this point in time was going to come. So like you have to gather the proper leadership and the proper people to do something significant for humanity. Because if we don't do it, the story of Atlantis, whether it's real or not, is a story to let us know what can happen to a society that becomes over-intellectualized, over-technologized, if that's even a word, and simultaneously that they are basically feeding off the ego. And what happened in Atlantis? Poof, they disappeared. Who knows? There's so many different types of stories of what happened, whether it's real or not. It's a depiction of what can happen to us. And if we do not get conscious leaders into power positions of society, building out these technologies in the right way, caring about humanity, we can enter into a dark state. But I believe that if we do this together, we bring people together, whether Legion and all the other endeavors that we do, we can have a better society, and we can be thriving, and we can be super creative, and we can learn so much more and live in a world that is very beautiful. And I think that's possible.
I do too. And I think that's definitely what attracted me to Legion. And yes, I'm one of the 333, but I don't think we're...
Yeah, she's one of them. Yes, indeed.
I'm a Legionnaires, however you say it.
Legionnaires, yes, Legionnaires, yes. The women of Legion and the Legionnaires.
But I think there's something really important here because, due to my past and some other circumstances, there's a part of me that operates in these lower echelons.
Yeah.
I haven't been able to, completely rise above that. But there's a part of me that operates, in some of these higher echelons for various reasons. And I think it's important that people understand that I don't think it's a one, it's like, oh, I'm a 310 Like, well, in
Yeah,
this,
exactly. You're right. You're right. 100%. You'll tap into these different fields, like even myself, you don't think I get angry and have desire and, like have some pride and stuff like that. So it's like learning about these things and the trauma from the past and, these things that were taught to us in society, our parents, our friends, television, the news, everything that has helped shave and carve us into something specific. Once you start learning, that everything is kind of like love, and you start learning these modalities to a very high degree, whether it is through Dr. David Hawkins, some of the great philosophers' teachings, Dr. DeMartini. There's a great one also called Self-Discovery with Rob James. He's one of the teachers right now that is teaching people how to get to 500 and 600, and he's one of the only people on the planet that is training people to get above a 600. And from what David Hawkins was talking about was that if there is about 33 to 30, I don't know the exact number, but it's between 33 and 36 people on the planet that are 600, it shifts the world into right order. And whether that's true or not, another one of those things where if you see the people that had high levels of consciousness were highly evolved, let's say Gandhi, they affected a lot of people. Like look at Gandhi. Gandhi definitely affected, if not a billion people, hundreds of millions of people. You know what I mean? Like he literally had that effect on humanity. And some of these people that were highly evolved, okay, that lived from compassion, love states, they're very neutral about things. Go ask the Dalai Lama and stuff like that. Some of these questions about, what's happening. And I forgot what it was. Like, oh, what do you think about the tsunamis that killed all these people? And he's like, he'll talk about the benefit and he'll say karma. And you're like, what the hell is wrong with this guy? You know what I mean? Like the guy is a highly evolved individual. There's highly evolved people that they look at the world completely different, but those people are not running our countries. They're not running the world. They're not running these technologies. And that's why it's quite dangerous. But, I think it's also like because a lot of these conscious individuals weren't bringing in some of that strong masculine force. So, some of the teachings that are happening now that I think are going to evolve into the future is having that strong masculine force. This is women and men. This is not just men I'm talking about here, with the conscious, like almost like I almost like to call it like a Shaolin monk, right? He's a warrior, but he's also present, Buddhist, Zen, just like the great saying that they say, it's like, I would rather be a warrior in a garden than be a gardener in a war.
well, I think this is a great note to end on, and I'm going to, plug Legion a little bit here too. Partially from my past and from genetics, from my family, I have anxiety and I have some social anxiety. Mm-hmm. And I was really nervous about going to Miami to our mastermind in Miami. And I was like, I don't know. I can't, walk into a room full of people I don't know. I'm going to feel really uncomfortable. This is going to be, it's a lot of money for me to go down there. I mean, you can hear my self-talk going on here, right? All this negative stuff. And I'm not kidding you. When I walked into the room and there was all these people around, there was that energy. And it's the energy of people who are operating, for the most part, not always, but on these higher levels of consciousness. And that's contagious. And, it just made me feel like, oh, wow, all my social anxiety went away. All of a sudden, I'm able to talk to people I don't even know and have meaningful conversations, not just, oh, hi, Jonathan, how you doing today? Oh, yeah, it's hot outside, isn't it?
Here's the baseball game.
Yeah. And so I think that, by having this conscious leadership, and like you said, if we can just start perpetuating this and creating those environments, we're just naturally going to attract people, and these people are going to feel and want to be part of, not, of course, Legion, that would be nice, but just be a part of this conscious movement, for lack of.
No, I mean, that's why when you told me, because I brought up the conscious leadership at a mastermind in New York. It was actually LEAP, the one that you went to, but it was first one. And everyone was talking about, what are the 5 most important things that society will be facing in the next 5 years? We said AI. Of course, this was before ChatGPT came out too. We said AI, blockchain, Web3 type of technologies that, decentralization versus like centralization, mental health, over-regulation and under-regulation. And then we're like, okay, what else is there? And I'm like, I stopped everyone. I'm like, guys, I was like, there's one thing that, in my opinion, literally will help all these. And it's conscious leadership. Because if you don't have conscious leaders helping out with AI and how it's going to look, Web3 and decentralization and centralization, mental health, okay, and over-regulation, under-regulation, what it takes, those are leaders. So the leaders aren't conscious that are making these rules and, putting new regulations in place, not putting regulations in place, you're in a dangerous path. So for me, that's why I'm like very, very keen on bringing conscious leader to the planet and conscious leadership and the concept of it, so that people can start to take this on and that we can start taking proper roles in society to bring us into the proper future that we would all like to see.
I think you said it very well. Thank you. So I really appreciate your time today. And I'm really excited to get this out there, because I think, just people listening to this, it's going to make a difference. So,
no, for sure, 100%. And I appreciate you doing this, because once I figured out that you love history and everything like that, I was like, oh, you're gonna like this stuff here, and we're gonna just create some really amazing things for the world. And we're very happy that you're like in the Legion community, because you're an amazing individual with doing amazing things and bringing this history and being able to talk openly about some of these subjects that other people would just be very polarized about.
Yes, thank you. So how would people reach you if you want them to reach you?
Yeah. No, for sure. I mean, Instagram, for those that are doing Instagram, it's like Rain in the Making with periods in between. Anyone that just wants to reach out to me directly, it could be jonathan@digitalagebusiness.com. If you have any questions about whatsoever. Obviously there's Legion, so it's wearelegion.xyz. You can reach out to us on our social medias too, which is like wearelegion.xyz on Instagram and Twitter. And, and always maybe even up to Cheryl. You guys could hit up Cheryl and just ask questions or see how you could reach out to us and everything like that, but I'm very grateful for Cheryl to doing this podcast and what she's doing here, because, this is a great service to humanity just by having this. Appreciate that.
Well, thank you for your time. And I look forward to our next mastermind in December.
Yeah, I think October, November. Yeah.
I got the date wrong. Oh, well.
Somewhere around there.
We'll see you in October.
Yes, appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Flashback to a Fabulous Future. We hope today has helped you understand how the past influences the future and created the present. Until we talk again, have a beautiful week.